Before a building rises from the ground, before structure is calculated or materials are assembled, its spatial logic has to be made visible. To understand architectural drawing, you have to realize it is not a method of copying reality. It is a way of interpreting space and constructing meaning. A drawing can be geometrically perfect, mathematically exact, and yet completely fail to be spatially convincing. The blank page is the architect's primary testing ground. It is where intention is explored, questioned, and clarified. We are going to deconstruct how this happens, building a drawing from a single, simple line all the way up to a fully realized presentation board. In this process, elements like line weight, perspective, and tone do not act as decoration. They function as a language, with their own grammar and syntax for spatial reasoning. Mastering representation is about acquiring the ability to think through a building before it exists. At its most basic level, a line establishes presence. It defines an edge or a boundary, separating a wall from an opening or an object from its background. But if every line on the page is drawn with the exact same thickness, the drawing becomes visually democratic in the worst sense. Everything shouts at once, and the eye cannot distinguish primary structure from secondary detail. Look at this flat, two-dimensional elevation. To create structural rhythm and legibility, we apply line weight. By introducing shifts in thickness, we immediately organize the chaos. The strict rule in architectural orthographic drawing is that elements cutting through solid material, like a section through a concrete slab or a masonry wall, require the heaviest, boldest lines. They are the most spatially significant. Secondary outlines define the major forms seen beyond that cut. The lightest, thinnest lines are reserved for background context, surface textures, and fine interior details. Heavier lines pull objects visually forward into the foreground. Lighter lines force elements to recede into the distance. Line weight is a definitive spatial judgment. It tells the viewer exactly how to read the building's depth. Orthographic drawings, like plans and sections, are highly analytical, but they do not mimic human sight. To understand how a body will experience a volume, we need a different system. Perspective is the mathematical system that bridges abstract geometric measurements with how the eye actually encounters space. Everything in this system is organized around the horizon line. In architectural drawing, this is strictly the viewer's eye level, whether sitting or standing, rather than the literal landscape horizon. Because all receding lines in a one-point perspective converge at a single spot, it creates a strong sense of directed movement. It implies a formal axial precession and intense central focus. However, a building viewed straight on can feel static. One-point perspective often flattens the front surface and overemphasizes centrality. To solve this problem of spatial staticness, we use two-point perspective. The viewer's position shifts so no face is parallel to the picture plane, placing the vanishing points far apart. This system forces the viewer to confront volumetric relationships and corner conditions simultaneously, exposing multiple planes of the massing at once. Where one-point perspective emphasizes sequential depth and focus, two-point perspective emphasizes directional tension and the reality of the building as a three-dimensional object. Choosing a perspective system is a decision about how the architecture will be navigated by a human body. Form is an invisible idea until it is revealed by light. Adding a light source is the critical step in moving a drawing from abstract geometry to a physical environment. Notice the form shadow. This shading fills the unlit side of a volume as the surface turns away from the light, revealing its orientation and depth. Then there is the cast shadow, the shape one object throws onto another surface. This reveals projection, the depth of reveals and recesses, and spatial layering. The way you apply tone dictates materiality. Reflective glass requires minimal, high-contrast marks, while heavy concrete absorbs light more diffusely, appearing matte and weighty. Tonal hierarchy uses strong contrast to guide the viewer's eye to the most critical architectural thresholds, ensuring the image remains legible. Together, light and tone establish the emotional atmosphere. They indicate whether a space feels civic and solemn, or warm and intimate. Shadow is an active structural tool. It gives form gravity, legibility, and mood. Empty architectural drawings often look mathematically elegant, but they fail to communicate true scale. Architecture is measured through the body. We understand the height of a ceiling or the width of an alcove only when we compare those dimensions to our own physical presence. Inserting figures and furniture into a drawing is an act of design evaluation. It allows you to test circulation paths, seating arrangements, and spatial compression. Specific human postures assign distinct programmatic functions to otherwise neutral geometric planes. A figure leaning against a railing implies a view and a pause, while a seated figure transforms a corner into a zone of intimacy. Moving to the exterior, site context is a constitutive partner to the architecture. It is not a decorative frame. Sketching the ground plane, the slopes, paths, and retaining walls anchors the building. It dictates exactly how the structure meets the earth and interacts with the urban or natural landscape. Adding occupation and landscape proves that architecture does not end at the wall. It is a continuous relationship between the body and the environment. The highly structured drawing we just built is the final result, but it is not how the architectural process begins. Early concept sketching relies on a state of productive ambiguity. At this stage, exactness is a liability. A sketch must remain loose enough to keep alternatives open and prevent premature fixation on a single idea. While an abstract diagram distills pure relationships like circulation or zoning, a sketch tests whether those relationships can actually generate physical form. Iterative sketching functions as a testing ground for formal consequences, for spatial sequences, and material realities. You draw, evaluate, and draw again. The willingness to draw, fail, and redraw ambiguous sketches is the ultimate safeguard against building a structurally weak concept. When the iterative phase ends, the presentation drawing takes over as an act of public communication and visual rhetoric. The first obligation of presentation is clarity. The drawing must make the organization, structural scale, and spatial logic instantly legible to varied audiences. The second obligation is character. The representation must communicate the distinct atmospheric identity and material presence of the design. A purely technical drawing only informs. A successful presentation drawing persuades and evokes. This is not about manipulating the truth. It is about strategically editing information to reveal the core architectural intelligence of a project. Mastering architectural drawing means acquiring the capacity to imagine, test, and clearly communicate the lived experience of space before reality breaks ground.